Before we start, oh, hey, we're recording. Yay. Well, welcome. Thank you everybody for being here for our Student Lives and Career and Employment Services series on Adulting 101. We are so blessed today to have Education Credit Union, who's going to talk to us about credit. And we have Colton Hibbs, who is a financial educator, my tongue got tied, with Education Credit Union. So he's going to talk to us today about understanding credit. Anytime you have a question, just drop that in the chat and we will do questions at the end that we can ask to Colton.
Absolutely.
Also, go ahead and put your student ID to all panelists in the chat as well, so that way you can be entered for a chance to win a $25 gift card. So Colton, I'm going to go ahead and let you take it over to share with all of us about credit.
Perfect. All right, guys, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with me here this afternoon. So credit is one of those fundamental financial principles that really influences the whole way we live our lives here. And so basically, a lot of what I do is feedback based. So forgive me, I'm going to be tempted to ask questions to an audience that I cannot see. And so forgive me. But essentially, when it comes to the basics, credit, as we understand it from the financial institution side, so as a credit union, what we look at credit as is your financial reputation. We recognize and remember everyone in our lives who comes with a reputation, especially college students. You might remember back in high school, those students who were really incredible athletes or the class clown. They all have a reputation that goes with them. As an adult, of course, in this adulting series, your financial reputation is one of the most important because your financial reputation dictates essentially where you live, what you drive, and in essence, in many cases, it can also dictate where you work. Your credit score, which is calculated based on how you use credit, is a grade. Grades never escape you. Spoiler alert. Grades never escape you. You've had grades since kindergarten. There's a 99-year-old person in Amarillo, Texas, who, if they've applied for a loan ever in their life, they still have a grade next to their name on some paper somewhere. And so what we want to do is make sure that you know exactly what contributes to that grade and how you can bring it up. The only thing that you actually need credit for. Now, it's a great tool to facilitate a common life in our society, but the only thing you need a credit score for is to borrow money to buy a home. The average cost for a home in Amarillo, Texas hovers between $117,000 to about $122,000. And so if you have no proven track record of borrowing and repaying money, no one is going to loan you $120,000 to purchase a home. And so you can, of course, save up for cash to do those things. You can save up for cash to buy a car. You can save up for cash to go on vacations or finance a wedding or what have you. You can save up cash for a lot of small expenses and some considerably large expenses like a new car. But when it comes to buying a home, time is against you in saving up $120,000 for a home. And so traditionally, what most people do is borrow that money. And the only way they can borrow that money is if they can prove they have been responsible borrowers in the past, which is essentially what your credit score is a measurement of. So what is credit? It's your financial reputation. It's important because do people with lower credit still get loans? Absolutely. But credit impacts how much we pay for things, and we'll talk about that. So it's important to maintain that score so you can pay closest to the appropriate amount of things. And then do you need credit? Only if you want to participate in a traditional way of life within our society, which generally speaking, most of us do. So let's take a look here at some credit scores. Now, the FICO score component model is how your score is actually calculated. These 5 pieces are what determines your credit score, your credit grade, okay? The largest portion, as we can see, is payment history. Payment history is 35% of a person's credit score, or for that particular line of credit. So 35% is just paying your bills on time, every single time. That is the majority of where a person's credit score comes from. And it's also where people tend to get in trouble the most. So payment history, it looks like, okay, if you miss a bill or are late, if you don't pay or are late payment, you know grades. So we'll use this illustration. You're in school. So pretend for a moment that you wanted the lowest interest rate possible on buying your first home. That was your primary goal, which is a great goal to have. So, and you know that you haven't started credit yet, but you want to. So what's going to happen is you're going to take out your first loan or borrow or open your first credit card or line of credit. And you know exactly what to do because you've listened to me. So you know exactly what you're going to do to get that perfect credit score, to get that lowest interest rate. So for the first 3 months, we'll pretend it's a test like you're in school and you get 100, 100, 100. You do every single thing right. You pay your bill on time every time. You don't borrow too much, etc. But month 4 comes. And for whatever reason, you are late or you're unable to make the payment. And so now you can do all of the other things, but the highest grade you can make is a 65. 35 minus 100 is 65. So you have 100, 100, 100. Oh, but month 4 comes and you got a 65 on that particular test, we'll say. It will take you 13 more perfect hundreds to bring your grade up to a 99.5 that can be rounded up to 100. And so that's the illustration of it will take 13 more perfect hundreds after that 65 to bring your grade up to where you want it to be. The illustration, of course, highlights how quickly your credit can fall versus how slowly it will rise. That is not to say that mistakes that are made with credit are unfixable, but fixing them requires significantly more time and a heaps of discipline versus just forgetting or making a late payment. So payment history, if nothing else, pay your bills on time every time. Your creditors on time, all bills, but your creditors especially on time every time. The next component of the FICO scoring model, and just so we're clear, a FICO score, it stands for the Fair Isaac Corporation. So when we say FICO, we're saying the Fair Isaac Corporation, and they're the ones who determine the scoring model, which we'll talk about here momentarily. The next largest portion is the amount owed. Now, if you've heard me speak before, or if you were in last week's Badger Smart session, what we notice is that I like to view credit as sort of a game. That is not, of course, to minimize the importance, but most financially successful people generally don't view money, and especially credit, as something they need to survive. It is more of a resource game, like they're playing Monopoly, but with actual money. And so when I say it's a game, it is, it's still a game that determines where you live, what you drive, and what you get to do for a living. But it's friendlier for you. It allows people to get their hands on it and make it more manageable rather than something that's large that can potentially crush them. So to put it in your hands, think of it like a game. So the amount owed, we can do that with this as a good example. The amount that you owe is 30% of your credit score. So for a particular line of credit, looking at that, we'll pretend that you have a credit card with $1,000 credit limit, okay? If you've borrowed $990 of that $1,000 credit card limit, how much do you have left over? Yes, $10. You have $10 left over. And is that a lot of wiggle room? Of course it is not. And so you owe $990 out of $1,000. That is not a good thing. And that will negatively impact your credit score for that line of credit by approximately 30%. And that's the danger. When I say think of it as a game, there's a solution to that. So what some people do, you can maintain all of these things wonderfully. You can make your bills on time every time. You don't open or ask for new lines of credit often. You keep it within the 2 a year. You've had credit for maybe 3-4 years, and you have an unsecured and a secured loan. All of those things that may seem unfamiliar, we'll talk about momentarily. But say you're doing everything else right. You just have borrowed $990 out of that $1,000 credit card limit, okay? Then you've over borrowed, but you're still within your limit. You will still get offers for credit cards. And so when I say think of it like a game, some people will take that $1,000 credit card limit and apply for another credit card that gets them $2,000 more to borrow. So now their total credit limit between the two cards is $3,000, and they've only used $990 of it. When their limit was $1,000, $990 is bad. When their limit is $3,000, $990 is not as bad, right? You see how that works? But they haven't paid off any of their debt. They've just raised their debt ceiling. That's dangerous and unwise. I do not recommend it. But in terms of playing a game, that is how some people do it. Again, it is not wise and incredibly risky. And when it comes to credit, we're going to show you how you don't need to take significant risks with your future to accomplish your goals. Let's continue forward. New lines of credit. So as I said, the person didn't apply for credit multiple times throughout the year. As we said at the beginning, we don't need credit to survive, okay? We need credit to facilitate a particular sort of lifestyle within our society. So whenever a person applies for credit, it's a hit on your credit each and every time. Now, there is a very popular service that advertises the ability to check your credit score at any time with zero consequences. And I have just told you that each and every time that your credit score is checked, it is monitored and it's a ding by about 10% on your credit score for that line of credit. Okay. How that works, how Credit Karma works, is that there is a brilliant math equation determined by the Fair Isaac Corporation. That math equation is proprietary. That algorithm is proprietary. And so nobody knows, if you like math, you cannot look up the algorithm or the equation to calculate your own credit score on your own by hand or put it in your computer. Nobody knows it but the Fair Isaac Corporation. What Credit Karma has done with the 3 credit bureaus that report to the 3 credit bureau agencies in America that report to one another, they're TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. Equifax and TransUnion got together and said, hey, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express, you can advertise your services on our website. And you know what? We're going to make a similar math equation or algorithm to calculate a person's projected credit score. And what they can do is they can run their numbers through that math equation as often as they want to, with zero consequences. And as they visit our website to check their credit scores, you can advertise credit opportunities and credit cards to them. It's a win-win-win. So the consumer, us, can check our credit scores and see if there's any of our personal information that is being used out there. That's a wonderful feature of Credit Karma. You can see anytime your address has been used or your personal identifying information has been used to open an account in your name. It shows you that information, and it gives you a projected ballpark credit score. Sometimes that credit score is in the outfield of the ballpark, and that's the problem. And so since that math equation is similar, but not the same, we've seen it be 40 points different, we've seen it be 10 points different. And so different is different, and it is not the credit score that your lender, should you ever go to borrow money or when you go to borrow money, it is not going to be likely the same score. So that's the difference with new lines of credit. Now, new lines of credit also. How many of us have engaged in car buying or car shopping? And, somebody comes up to you with, hey, can we check your credit real fast? Make sure you can make that monthly payment. We hear things like that. And every time you go car shopping, there's somebody that's going to want to check your credit score. Okay. And that's fine. They're going to look and make sure. Now, certain soft pools are fine. They are just looking at a particular line to make sure you can make a monthly payment. But if they actually continually ding your credit, what's going to happen is the next time you go to borrow money, we can see that you've been shopping for a car. So every dealership that ran your credit, and not in a traditional soft pull fashion, we can see that, oh, you went to 9 different dealerships. There were 9 hits on your credit, but we can adjust it and look at it as 1 instead of 9 different ones. Okay. So that new lines of credit option, we want to see maybe 2 inquiries in a calendar year. 2 inquiries in 12 months is fine. The trouble arises whenever someone is frequently asking to borrow money. We wonder what you're doing with your money to where you need to borrow our money. Because remember, we don't need credit to live. We just need it to facilitate a certain kind of lifestyle. And if your budgeting methods, or if you're just handling money on your own, don't have the opportunities and require credit to just get by or just pay your bills, or, meeting an emergency is a little different, but at the same time, multiple inquiries are a red flag to us, and it's going to mean a conversation with your lender as to how often or how you do handle your money. Length of credit history, that works in your favor. The longer a person has credit, generally speaking, the better their credit is, to the tune of 15%. Also, length of credit history comes into play when you close accounts. I remember I was in junior high. My mother had closed a credit card that had plagued us since I was in kindergarten. And finally, after a little over a decade, my mother was able to finally close out that account, and she cut up the card. And I remember her excitedly running to her bedroom and getting on the phone and calling the number to say, cancel my account, close it out. I'm not borrowing anything from y'all ever again. It was much more colorful than that, but she was very excited to have made that final payment. Whenever you close an account, your credit history for that line of credit, what if that's a credit card, if that's a loan, what have you, it disappears. And so it ceases to positively impact you. And a personal example for me was there was when I purchased a piece of furniture, paid it out, and once I finished that last payment, that line of credit went away with that store because I paid it off and it wasn't open, so it went away. Well, it decreased the average age of my credit accounts by a little bit, and my credit score took a 4 or 5 point hit, and it bumped right back up in a couple of months. But when you close out accounts, it alters the length of your credit history, and it can negatively impact you. So best thing, even if you paid off a card that was troublesome, or if you've finished an open-end loan and you still have the opportunity to borrow, or opportunity to have a line of credit at a store, what have you, it's best to keep it open and just never use it. It'll close out itself on its own, and that's a slightly different process. And so, but basically, closing out accounts is a no-no. Just don't use it if you don't need it anymore. Okay, that way you keep building that length of credit history. The last thing we'll talk about, the last component of your credit score by 10% is credit mix. This is the only time anyone will ever hear me use a sort of athletic simile. So here goes. I'm not great at this, but we all recall those people in our lives who were great at playing football or basketball, but couldn't play baseball to save their lives. Or they play golf, but they cannot play tennis. Or they can swim, but they can't run. They're terrible track stars. Any variety of those combinations. What financial institutions look for they're looking for an all-around athlete. So when it comes to credit card payments, if you've only ever handled a credit card for 30 years and suddenly you need a car loan, well, that's reasonable, but we're going to have questions because we've only ever seen you play tennis, and now you're asking to play basketball. And so we're going to have a conversation. They might be a wonderful all-around athlete, but the only thing we've ever seen is just them handle credit cards or just them handle student loan debt, and now they're looking for a mortgage. We're curious as to how that works out in their favor. So mix of credit, mix between secured and unsecured debt is necessary. Now, when I say secured and unsecured debt, it is from the financial institution's perspective. So think of it this way. If you ask me to borrow money for a car, say, I need $20,000 for a car. I say, great. So I'm going to do my research and all that fun stuff and make sure you're eligible and credit worthy for the loan. We'll talk about that here. And then I'm going to loan you that money. What happens if you don't pay me back the money that I loaned you to buy that car? Exactly. I will take the car. And that's what's secured. Secured debt is something that your financial institution or your lender can take and then resell to gain the money that they lost if they're not repaid. That's what an unsecured debt looks like. That night out with friends, you went to dinner and a movie and put it on the credit card. Well, we can't take that back, not yet. And so the interest rate, the risk for loaning that money, because that's all a credit card is a loan that you get to keep in your back pocket. The risk for loaning that money is higher. So you'll have a higher interest rate on that card. And then if you choose not to make those credit card payments or are unable to make those credit card payments, it will significantly and drastically, quickly decrease your credit score, which makes life difficult because, again, it determines where you live, what you drive, and in some cases where you work. Now, I've said that a couple of times, so let's look at it in a little more detail. When it comes to where you live, people with D and E, in some cases C credit, find it difficult to get home loans, which means that they're renting. And if your landlord or apartment owner does check your credit, they can, of course, dismiss your application to live there based on your credit score if they choose. But then, even so, if you're not able to borrow money to finance your own home, then that's rent money that's going into someone else's pocket, and you're not investing in your own future. So it affects where you live. Where you drive, do people with C, D, and E credit scores drive their dream car or the car that they can afford? And is there a difference? Usually there is. And so then, of course, it affects what you drive, driving what you can afford versus maybe what your dream car might be. And then where you work. In many careers, military included, advancements, promotions, even just outright employment can be hindered by a person's credit score if it puts them at risk for extortion or things like that. So you will not be hired or will not be able to advance within certain careers based on your credit score, which then affects your overall income. And you see how it's sort of a all-encompassing kind of deal. So it is important, but remember, it's very easily manageable. Credit grades, though, do not go on a scale from 1 to 100. They go on a scale from about 300 to 850. There are several scoring models used. The most common in our area is the FICO scoring, the Fair Isaac Corporation scoring model. But we have A+ all the way to E. The letter that is missing is F, because nobody likes to get an F, not even as adults. And so, but people with C, D, and E, these lower credit score ranges, can still get loans. It might be not for the term that they want. It might not be the interest rate that they want, but in certain cases, depending on the circumstance and purpose, they can still get loans. The big deal is the amount of interest that they're paying on those loans. So let's look here at how interest really impacts a person, okay? Now, interest is how financial institutions do make money. So for instance, I'm from Colton from Education Credit Union. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with how credit unions function and how we are different from banks, what it looks like is that banks traditionally are owned by a group of wealthy people or a corporation or a singular wealthy individual. And what they do is that group of wealthy people then loans their own money to their consumers, their customers. And that money, of course, goes to the institution itself, to the bank. And then the bank has its support staff that loans that money out. Whenever people pay back those loans, the first people to see that interest are the people who originally loaned that money out, the wealthy owners of the bank. The key difference between banks and credit unions are that credit unions are member-owned. So at Education Credit Union, we have approximately 29,000 owners. That means that our interest, we are the first people to see our interest rate. And that looks like higher interest rates on our savings account, because in each and every savings account at a bank or credit union, you're earning some amount of interest. But I can guarantee you that at a credit union, you are earning more interest than on your savings account than a bank traditional savings account. And it is interest is the most important thing to consider when you are borrowing money. We've all been there. So I'm going to take you back to when you're like, single digit age, and you're with your grown up and you go to the store, okay? And you get $5, all right? That's your limit. You get $5, you go into your store and you find that thing and it's $4.99. Woohoo, hot dog. And you know what? You're growing up now. So you're going to check out by yourself. So your grown up is going to check out before you. Of course, they're going to set their stuff down on the thing, and the cashier is going to scan it and put it in the bag. Then they're going to step aside. And you're going to set your item up, your $4.99 item up there, and you have that $5 bill in your pocket, right? You remember. And so you have that $5 bill in your pocket, and then the cashier is going to scan your purchase, and they're going to say, all right, your total is $5.40. And how many of us have been in that situation where we lean over to our grown-up and whisper, Can I have $1 for the tax? We were very young when we learned for the first time that the price is not the price. And it is the same throughout the rest of your life. Taxes are the first thing we learn, that price is not the price. But when you're shopping for your car, that sticker price is not the price if you're going to borrow that money. And when you're shopping for your home, that price listed on Realtor.com, on Trulia, on Zillow, that price is not the price because you're going to borrow that money. And so when you get to the end of 30 years, the end of 5 or 3 years for your car, that you're not going to have paid what was this on the sticker. You're going to have paid significantly more. And so let's take a look at an example here. The only difference here between Henry and Maria are their credit scores. We're going to pretend they live in alternate universes. They have the same job. They earn the same income. There are a variety of ways they can pay $0 on a down payment, but we won't discuss those today. But they're each paying $0 down, and they're each taking out a 30-year mortgage. The only difference between, they're buying the exact same house, this lovely little number over here. Exact same house, just alternate universes, okay? Henry's C credit score of 620, he's going to pay more for this exact same house, making the exact same money on the exact same terms as Maria, who has an A+ credit score. Now, one of my favorite things to do at this point is to play sort of Price is Right and get you all to guess how much each one is going to pay without going over. So I'll have to live without the thrill of seeing your faces go, but in total for that $120,000 home, Henry will have paid $212,000. In interest alone, just the cost of borrowing the money for the home, he'll have paid $92,000 over the course of 30 years. Maria, she is still borrowing money. You will still pay interest when you borrow money, even with A+ credit, but she's paying $16,000 less. I can think of a wide variety of things I could do with $16,000. Now, spread across 30 years, it hits different, obviously, but at the same time, that's still $16,000, and the only difference between them is their credit score. Henry could have waited a year, maybe 2, and brought his credit score up to the same level as Maria's and paid her same amount of interest and saved himself $16,000. That's the difference in the sticker price. 30 years is a long time, and there are other vehicles and tools like refinancing and all of those things that you'll learn about as you purchase property and things like that on your own. But just flat rates, these are based on current rates as well. I asked our girl in mortgage, Sandra, like she has the numbers. So these are based on current rates, how much a person is paying. Now, that's not to say don't make decisions with C credit. I'm just saying that there's a big difference between what people can do, what people do pay, and what they can pay. Now, when people apply for loans, we of course pull their credit history and get their credit score. But one of the biggest reasons, the number one reason that most people are denied loans at our financial institution, Education Credit Union, is because of their debt to income ratio. Debt to income ratio does not impact your credit score. Okay, it is simply a comparison of assets and liabilities. So when you calculate your debt, you can calculate your debt to income ratio on your own. You add up your monthly bills that you pay to creditors. So student loan payments, credit cards, car payment, personal loans, mortgages, those things that you're paying to creditors. We're not talking about an electric bill. We're not talking about groceries. We're not talking about rent. Just things that you pay to creditors. And then you take your monthly income. So you add up how much you owe to creditors, then you divide it by how much you make every month. Your gross monthly income. Gross is that money before taxes. So before your taxes are taken out on your pay stub, you take that amount, how much you owe to creditors, divide it by your gross monthly income, and that becomes your debt to income ratio. Now, if a person's debt to income ratio is too high, because we look at what they owe creditors, credit card, car payment, personal loan, mortgage. And like I said, that's not groceries, that's not pet expenses, that's not daycare, that's not rent, that's not, you understand, that's not your cell phone. Okay. So if your debt to income ratio is a little high, what we're going to think of are all of those other things. We've seen debt to income ratios that are astronomical. And we're wondering how they can afford a cell phone, how they can afford childcare, how they can afford groceries on their own. A high debt to income ratio will prompt a conversation with your lender because they're going to ask, do you split any of these bills with anybody else? How or why? And how much. We can adjust debt to income ratios. That's not a problem. But that's why sometimes people get a little flustered when their lender will ask intrusive questions, or what they perceive to be intrusive questions, like, do you have anybody splitting rent with you? And how many, how do you pay for childcare at all? Do you have children? Those are very personal questions. But if we see certain expenses or things that raise red flags for us or raise questions, one of the most important things we can do is make it easier on you by asking those questions, because you may have really good answers and we can adjust our findings accordingly. Now, let me zoom in there a little bit so you can see it better. It's a little faded. There we go. So yes, look at the math, take pictures, screenshots, what have you, and we can come back to this if you have questions at the end of the session. Now, we talked about what impacts your credit and why it's important, but and a lot of people already know how important credit is, or how it can hurt them, at least. Many people are familiar with how credit can hurt them. And it comes from that experience, typically comes from not knowing how to build it. So if you're looking at building credit, or if you've built it and are looking how to fix it, the process for repairing credit and building it is relatively the same, because all you're doing always is rebuilding your credit. You can tear it down by missing a payment, and then you're going to rebuild it by taking proper financial behaviors. Now, secured credit cards are offered by every single financial institution, whether a bank or a credit union. Secured, remember the difference between secured and unsecured debt. There's something that we can take. So I believe locally, the minimum deposits for any financial institution is $300. So you walk into your bank or credit union of choice and you hand them $300 and you say, I would like a secured credit card. That $300 goes into an account, and that $300 then becomes your credit limit. It's secured because if you use that $300, you rack it up and you charge up that $300 on your credit card, on your secured credit card, and you elect not to pay it. Well, you've already paid us that $300. So we just take that back, and that your credit history is adjusted accordingly. But if you use a secured credit card wisely, what you will do is you will not borrow more than 40% of your total credit limit. Remember that amount owed when you had that $1,000 credit card and you used $990 of it? There's actually a magical percentage. I say magical. There's actually a rule of thumb percentage that you shouldn't overborrow. And that's about 40%. So out of $1,000 credit card limit, you can safely spend $400 without it negatively impacting that line of credit. And then if you pay it on time, and bonus points, if you pay it off every month. One of the best ways, again, credit doesn't need to be elaborate. It just needs to establish a responsible borrowing history. And responsibility can be done, with $40 a month. Say you're getting gas. You're going to get it anyway with your debit card. So you already have that money in your checking account. You already buy gas. So if you switch and start using your credit card to purchase gas, you already have that money in your checking account, which is the only time you should spend money on a credit card is if you have the money in your checking account. And so you have that money in your checking account for gas, but you're going to use your credit card. And then you're going to wait a day, and then you're going to go and take that money from your checking account and pay off your credit card payment. That's all it is. You've used it, so we see activity, and you're not carrying a balance. So it's great. It keeps it open, 100% on-time payment history. You're doing wonderful things. And so long as you don't borrow more than 40% of that unsecured credit amount of your total credit limit and make all of your payments on time, your credit score can go up like 2 points a month. Keep it small. Just take small steps. It's important to do that, to not overextend yourself, because you're doing so much already. You're in school. You have a life outside of school too. There's no point in complicating it with things that are unfamiliar or potentially dangerous. Keeping it simple with necessary purchases that are relatively the same. You spend the average amount of gas. There's an average amount a month you spend on gas. You can calculate it yourself. And so you're not going to spend over that, and you're already used to spending it out of your checking account. You're still going to spend it out of your checking account. You're just going to add the middleman of your credit card first. That's a great way to build up credit safely. Just buying things you need that you're already going to purchase anyway with money that you already have in your checking account. Now, if you do have, unfavorable credit history, again, like I said before, there's nothing broken that can't be fixed, but there are other options then for you. I want you guys to take a look at these 3 credit reports. These are not real or real people. The names are not real. This is based on actual activity, but these are not real people. We have Susan, Anastasia, and Lisa. All of them have fair credit. And as you can see, their credit scores range from 655 to 699. This is the front page of what almost every single credit report looks like. This is actually much more colorful and typeface friendly. It looks like you pulled it straight off a typewriter in 1989, but essentially the information is the same. And so this first page will tell us straight off the bat your name and that grade. That's what we'd see first. And then the rest of the pages and the rest of the information on the first page tells us how you got this grade. So when we see things like past due here with Susan, past due, people like to use the phrase fall off. Oh, that'll fall off of your credit in a few years. Oh, that'll fall off in 7 years. Oh, that'll fall off in 10 years. Things don't really fall off. It's not accurate. We can see when you've missed payments or when you have late payments for many, many, many years, as long as you've had credit history. The accurate way to say it is this ceases to negatively impact you. So it doesn't fall off. It ceases to negatively impact you. And when it comes to past due, late, or missed payments, that payment history, remember that 35% of your credit score, it ceases to negatively impact a person 2 years after the mistake is made. So you have 2 years, and then in month 25, it, quote unquote, falls off, ceases to negatively impact you. This person, Susan, has 7 years credit, which is good. Again, we can see back at least 7 years and see her responsible borrowing history. Credit inquiries, those new lines of credit that affect you by 10%, she hasn't made any credit inquiries up until this point in the last 2 years, or in month 25 is when they, again, cease to negatively impact you or vanish off of your credit report. Now, her debt ratio is 61%. Again, debt ratio, there's a magical percentage for unsecured borrowing. That amount owed, we want you to have her around 40%. Debt ratio, there isn't really a magical percentage point. It really does depend on your income. So if you're making bukus of money and you have a debt ratio of 72%, but you make so much money that adding one other bill won't hurt you, that's different than, say, you make significantly less and your debt ratio is 40%, but you still won't have enough money to cover the next bill. So that's where the calculation comes in. But a higher than 50% debt ratio, especially depending on income, will earn her a conversation. So, and then we're going to see the big things that impact her credit score currently, what add or contribute to her amount that she owes. That wedding loan, the mortgage, the credit card, the student loan. We would ask, is there somebody assisting with payment on this mortgage? Well, yes, most likely. And so what we would do then is that would adjust the debt ratio some. Is there somebody also helping pay with the wedding loan? Things like that. Those are the questions that we ask. Now.
Hey, Colton, just want to let you know, sorry to interrupt, but we have about 5 minutes left, and that includes questions.
Perfect. So, let me wrap this up really quickly then. What I want to do is emphasize to you guys that you are more than a number. My boss, the Vice President of Learning and Staff Development here, the other part of my job is helping teach employees. And what she does is she actually teaches mining a credit report class, teaches our employees who loan money how to read these credit reports in full. And one of the great things about it is that she always concludes with information from our CEO, or former CEO, is that 99% of people pay back their loans. We know this. You are not the enemy at a credit union. You are more than a number. Our asset category hovers currently around $300 million. So people have taken out $300 million. We have $300 million, and we're calling on about $1 million worth of loans. That's the ratio. So we know that people pay back their loans. Whenever you apply for credit, whenever you're asking to borrow money, all we're looking for is, do you want to pay us back, and can you? That's the long and the short of it. I apologize for taking up so much time. Do we have questions?
Yes, we have a couple of questions for you.
Awesome.
And you may have answered them. They asked them earlier on. So you may just reiterate your answer if
Absolutely.
you feel like you answered it. But so the first one was, if you are brand new, a college student, how do you begin building up your credit? I know
Awesome.
you mentioned that secured credit card about like gas and groceries. Do you have any other suggestions?
Absolutely. You can do things. I hesitate to suggest it, but you can, when you finance like purchases, so the F word, finance, it means make payments. And you can, my best friend, my roommate in college, actually, she purchased a bed from a furniture store. That means she opened a credit account at that store. It was $26 a month, and that helped her build her credit. And it was just that one bill that she had. If you are nervous or are unsure, if you are renting, you can ask your landlord to report your payment history to the credit bureaus when you make payments. That's for people who do not want to use credit, you can ask your landlord to report your payment history to the credit bureau. They are not obligated to, but that's a great way to do it without credit cards or things like that as well.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay, so the next one is there a difference between paying your payments early or on time? Do you get like bonus points if you pay?
You don't get bonus points for paying early. You just get penalized for paying late.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to paying off loans early, I would, especially for cars and especially for homes, I would check for prepayment penalties. Again, interest is how financial institutions earn money. So if you want to be really responsible and you take out a 5-year loan on your car, but you create a plan where you can pay it off in 3 years, just double check that you're not going to actually be charged a fee for paying something off early because they're missing out on that interest. But generally speaking, most of the time, there are no prepayment penalties. The earlier you pay something off, just you're helping yourself.
Okay, awesome. And then let's see. Again, you kind of mentioned it. So if somebody has a lower score currently and plan to buy a home in the next year, would it be smart to take the time and build up that score?
I absolutely would, especially now. And one thing I forgot to mention. Okay, so Credit Karma. I talked about the bad things about Credit Karma and how it's not an accurate reflection of your credit score. As a result of everything happening in our world right now, there's only one website, has always only been one website, annualcreditreport.com, all one word, annualcreditreport.com, that is mandated by the federal government to give you an accurate credit score. And here's the thing that has recently changed. Until April of next year, you can go to annualcreditreport.com and get a free credit report every single week with zero consequence to you, like across the board. So don't go to Credit Karma because you don't have to. And you can get an accurate one from annualcreditreport.com through April 2021 without consequence.
Good to know. Thank you. Okay. One of the other questions, does each company have a different interest rate?
Absolutely. So there are different interest rates across everything. So for homes and cars and personal loans and credit cards and different financial institutions, yes, everybody has their own interest rate based on whatever your score is. So if your 690 score could get you different interest rate at one bank versus another credit union versus a private lender, yes. So it behooves you to shop around, but just be careful when you do, especially for cars and things like that. And again, when we can see what you're shopping for and how often you shop when your credit is checked. So we know, and we can manually adjust certain things within reason.
Okay, awesome. Let's see. Okay, if my credit is 850, should I stop using credit?
That depends entirely upon your own motivations and goals. If your credit score is 850, buy a home if you don't already have one. Recognize that if your credit score is that good, when there comes a point where if you've accomplished everything that you want to accomplish, you can sort of rest on your laurels and reap the benefits. People with significantly higher than average credit scores get, rewards points, purchase offers, lower rates on things, and just free stuff like swag, stuff we all get. They get free swag. Like that's what if you're going to borrow, that can really help you in that way. But is really, the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness thing is get an education, get a car, get a home, raise your family. And if you've accomplished those things, once your home is paid off, you can rest on your laurels, and you can join us this evening when we talk about retirement for Badger Smart. But yeah, so 850, you keep on trucking and make whatever decision's best for you.
Okay. Okay, so we've got a couple more. I'm just gonna glance at them. Make sure. Okay, so when a store closes and you have a card with them, does it close your account, or do you?
That is exactly what happened to me. The mattress place when they closed that account, they closed and sold my account to somebody else, but it closed out that account for me. So yes, that even though it's not your fault, there are some instances where it is not your fault. But yes, you will still feel the penalty. But things like that are usually small and relatively temporary. And we understand those things. We can see those things on a credit report.
Okay. So let's see. Okay, let's say I'm at 850 right now. Will it still be at 850 by the time I'm 30? And
as long as you maintain the same borrowing history and spending patterns that you currently have, yes.
Yes. Okay.
Now, if it's 850 and you don't have credit or have a minimal credit history, again, your credit score can vary based on what you are applying for. So if your credit score for a car can be slightly different than your credit score for a home because there are different lending matrices. So I would talk to whoever, like you need to talk to the mortgage department, you need to talk to, the auto financing or personal loans, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. But yes, generally speaking, maintain your current patterns and you will keep the same score.
Okay. So there's more, but I'm going to choose one more.
And if you want to email me those, I can email the answers back to you too. That's the fun.
That's the other thing is, I will get your email from Taylor. And then Perfect. If anybody else, I'll say right now, if you have any other questions that we didn't get to, you can send us in the chat, or you can email Student Life and I can get answers for y'all.
We also have Badger Smart, which is tonight at 5:30 in Russell Hall, room 131. It's social distance, and you can come and ask all the credit questions you had. We did credit last week, but I bet Colton is more than happy to still answer
more than happy, and credit feeds into what we're talking about tonight too, which is about saving money for your future. So yes.
And we would love to have you there.
Okay, so the last one is, if I have a debit card, but I press credit when I pay, does that count?
No, it does not count, unfortunately. Okay. It's just that's how the point of sale system, that's how the point of sale system functions. It basically determines whether or not you put in your PIN or don't.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good stopping place. The other questions I will email you and Taylor for.
Perfect.
And we would love to have you guys again at Badger Smart tonight at 5:30. We have one more session next week on Thursday as well. Excellent. But we really appreciate all of you guys coming to listen to Colton about credit. And like Miranda said, that we'd be happy to get your questions and we can forward them on to our expert, Colton, for him to answer those things for you. Any final words for y'all?
I look forward to seeing y'all this evening.
All right. Thanks, you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.